how to debug a Python project. It would have been as easy as clicking the debug button on IntelliJ or on Visual Studio Code, but this assumes that you have a locally running Python process on your laptop. But what if our Python process is running remotely on a server, in a container, somewhere else? Then we would need to remotely connect the locally IDE, IntelliJ or Visual Studio Code to this process. And this is not a straightforward process. We need to open ports. Sometimes we need to import a new library. We need to define the settings of Visual Studio Code, etc., etc., etc. But what if I told you that there is an option to debug a remote Python process without doing any of this? So first I have to say that in Java it's easier because Java comes built in with the debug port. If you specify, all you need to do is to expose these ports. With Python, for some reason, it's much more difficult. Configuring the IDE, configuring the SSH port, it's sending some files into it, and in Visual Studio Code importing a new library, etc. This is a mess. So in this case, I think it's best to always, in general, utilize the already existing tools that we have. And there is an option to do this without installing anything, without doing any configuration. But the drawback of this would be that we would not use the IDE. But taking into account that debugging is not the best practice, it's not something we should do always, it's something to be in case of we don't have a print, we don't have monitoring, we don't have graphs, so we go to the rescue, to the debugger. So basically, let's say that we take the worst case. We have a Python process running in a remote machine, inside Kubernetes, inside a pod, inside a container. Okay, so let's debug this process together now, without installing anything. Remember, we are not installing anything. All straight out of the box. So the first thing to do is to log in with SSH exec inside the container. So there is the command of Docker where you run it and you get into the shell of the container. We got into the shell of the container. Now we have the Python process running. We close it. We do a kill to the Python process so that we started with our debugging. We go inside the file with VI. VI is almost always installed, or any text editor. Let's say that VI, because for what I've seen up to now, VI was always there. VI and the name of the Python file that we want to debug. We go to the line that we want to debug and we type breakpoint, opening and closing curly brackets. Once we type it, the minute we'll start the Python process, it would stop there in debug. So now we go back to the command line. All we did was edit a Python file, add the breakpoint line, simply type it, and then now we restart the Python process. Just type in the command inside the container to start up again the Python process. And now it would stop when it would reach this breakpoint. And now you can type help. Now you have a mini shell. It's called PDB, Python debugger. You can type help in order to get help on which commands you have. You can type N or next to go to the next line, to debug to the next line, just like F8 in IntelliJ. You can type Q to quit, C to continue running. It's like F9 in IntelliJ. You can type L or double L, which is list, show me where I am, show the lines of code with a pointer to the current line of code that we are at. We can type where to show the stack trace of the currently executing thread. We can type up or down, just type it. To go up the frames or down the frames, we can type an expression. Let's say that we have a variable named color. We can type color and it would type its value. We can type p space color, it would type the value of the color. Or if you want more pretty printing for a dictionary, then we type pp and the variable name. To sum it up, and next line, C continue, S step in, and R return stepped out of a function. So this was a brief overview of how to actually debug Python processes inside the container without using any IDE, which means we do not need to mess and install anything.